Today we are going to be learning about this new story, Hearts and Hands, written by O. Henry. This story is a very good story with a twist in the end. So let's start. At Denver, there was an influx of passengers into the coaches on the eastbound B&M Express. In one coach, there sat a very young woman dressed in elegant taste and surrounded by all the luxurious comforts of an experienced traveler. So this lady, or one of the characters in the poem, she is pretty well off. Okay, she is rich, so we get a hint of the lifestyle that she is accustomed to. And among the okay, so influx of passengers means arrival of passengers, and among the newcomers there were two young men, one of handsome presence with a bold, frank countenance and manner, the other a ruffled, glum-faced person, heavily built and roughly dressed. So, among the new arrivals, these two gentlemen were also present. One was of handsome presence with a bold, frank countenance and manner, the other a ruffled, glum-faced person, heavily built and roughly dressed. So, they got the only vacant seat that was opposite to the one facing the attractive young woman. So, they got that seat, and here the linked couple seated themselves. The young woman's glance, meaning that her eyes fell on the gentleman, and she saw that it was no one she knew, so fell upon them with a distant, swift disinterest, because initially she thought that it was no one she recognized. Then, when she did recognize, with a lovely smile brightening her countenance and a tender pink tinging her rounded cheeks, she held out a little grey gloved hand. So she held out her hand to handshake with one of the gentlemen sitting on the opposite side, and she spoke, her voice, full, sweet, and deliberate, proclaimed that its owner was accustomed to speak and be heard. So a hint of the we get a hint again of the lifestyle that she is accustomed to. She is probably used to giving orders to servants and the orders getting followed. So she is from a well-off family. Well, Mr. Easton, if you make me speak first, I suppose I must. Don't you ever recognize old friends when you meet them in the West? The younger man roused himself sharply at the sound of her voice, seemed to struggle with a slight embarrassment which he threw off instantly, and then clasped her fingers with his left hand. So, our rich lady, she has recognized one of the two people, okay, and the person she has recognized, he feels a slight embarrassment when the lady has recognized him, but he hid that slight embarrassment with a smile, and he shook her hand, which he which she held out. "It's Mrs. Fairchild," he said, with a smile. "I'll ask you to excuse the other hand. It's otherwise engaged just at present." So, because the other hand of Mr. Easton was tied to was locked in the handcuff, so the other hand is engaged just at present. He slightly raised his right hand, bound at the wrist by the shining bracelet. So his right hand is tied to the bracelet, to the left one of his companion. The glad look in the girl's eyes slowly changed to a bewildered horror. First, the lady was glad to meet an old friend, but then when he saw, but when she saw that Mr. Easton was tied to a handcuff, her face changed from a smile to a face in horror. The glow faded from her cheeks, and her lips parted in a vague, relaxing distress. Easton, with a little laugh as if mused, was about to speak again when the other forestalled him. So the rich lady was clearly distressed to find that his friend was in handcuffs. Easton was going to explain his situation when the other person sitting beside him started speaking before him, forestalled him, started speaking before him. Okay, the glum faced man had been watching the girl's countenance with veiled glances from his keen, shrewd eyes. So the other man had been watching the girl for some time now. You'll excuse me for speaking, miss, but I see you are acquainted with the marshal here. If you'll speak, if you'll ask him to speak a word for me when we get to the pen meaning the prison, he will do it, and it will make things easier for me there. He's taking me to Leavenworth prison. It's 7 years for counterfeiting. So the other person says that, miss, do not be afraid. This man is the marshal and I am the prisoner. So he is taking me to the prison, and please tell him to put a kind word for me in the prison so that it will make things easier for me when I am in the prison. And I have 7 years for counterfeiting. Oh, said the girl with a deep breath and returning color. So the lady, Mrs. Fairchild, her name was. So she was reassured when the man explained the situation. Dear Miss Fairchild, he said Easton calmly, I had to do something. Money has a way of taking wings onto itself, and you know it takes money to keep step with our crowd in Washington. So, sorry I missed a line here. S- oh, said the girl with a deep breath and returning color. So that is what you are doing out here, a marshal. Mrs. Fairchild now saw that his friend was now a marshal, and then the friend explained the situation. He said that uh, he needed money to keep up with the people in Washington, and he saw this job opportunity in the West, and he took it. It is not as high as position as that of an ambassador, but the ambassador doesn't call anymore. He needn't ever have done so, said the girl. So he compares his position to the ambassador. Ambassador is probably another friend of the girl, a mutual friend. So he says that it is not as high as that of an ambassador, but you ought to know that. And so now you are one of these dashing Western heroes and you ride and shoot and go into all kinds of dangers. That's different from the Washington life. You have been missed from the old crowd. So the girl says you have now a very interesting job where you can be one of these dashing Western heroes. You ride and shoot and go into all kinds of dangers. You have been left out from the Washington crowd. This life is different from the Washington crowd. The girl's eyes, fascinated, went back, widening a little to rest upon the glittering handcuffs. Don't you worry about them, miss, said the other man. All marshals handcuff themselves to their prisoners to keep them from getting away. The prisoner again reassured the girl by saying that all marshals handcuff themselves to their prisoners so that the prisoner does not escape. Mr. Easton knows his business. The girl asks, we will see you again in Washington soon? So will I see you soon in Washington? Mrs. Fairchild laughs. Then Easton says, not soon, I think. My butterfly days are over. My carefree days are over. I love the West, said the girl irrelevantly. Her eyes were shining softly. She looked away out the car window. She began to speak truly and simply, without the gloss of style and manner. So now the girl spoke her true mind, and she spoke so without the gloss of style and manner. She said this just casually. Mama and I spent the summer in Denver. She went home a week ago because father was slightly ill. I could live and be happy in the West. I think the air here agrees with me. Money isn't everything, but people always misunderstand things and remain stupid. Say, Mr. Marshall, growled the glum faced man. So the glum faced man says, Mr. Easton, that this is not quite fair. I need a drink and I haven't had a smoke all day. Haven't you talked long enough? Take me in the smoker now, won't you? I'm half dead for a pipe. I need a pipe to smoke badly. So the travelers rose to their feet, Easton with the same slow smile on his face. He said, I can't deny a petition for tobacco. If you want tobacco, I cannot deny it. It's the one friend of the unfortunate. Goodbye, Miss Fairchild. Duty calls, you know. He held out his hand for a farewell. It's too bad you are not going east, she said, reclothing herself with manner and style. But you must go on to Leavenworth, I suppose. But it is bad that you are not going to the east with me. But you have to go to Leavenworth. Yes, said Easton. I must go on to Leavenworth. The two men sidled down the ale into the smoker, so they got up and went into the smoker coach. The two passengers in a seat nearby had heard most of the conversation. One of them said that Marshall's a good sort of chap. The Marshall is a good man. Some of these Western fellows are all right. Then the other one says, pretty young to hold an office like that, isn't he? Young, exclaimed the first speaker. Why, didn't you catch on? Say, did you ever know an officer to handcuff a prisoner to his right hand? So, in the end, the twist is revealed. Mr. Easton, his right hand was handcuffed to that of the marshal, and in the end, one man says that marshals never handcuff their right hand to the prisoners. So here it is revealed that Mr. Easton is the fugitive and the glum faced man is the marshal who is taking Mr. Easton to Leavenworth. I will now justify the title of Hearts and Hands. O. Henry has named the story Hearts and Hands. The plot of the story is related to the theme of showing compassion and not judging people by their outer appearance. The story begins with two people, Mr. Easton and the glum-faced man, handcuffed together. It is the handcuffing that leads to the hands part of the title. In fact, it is the hands, handcuffs, which are significant for revealing the true identities of the two men. Miss Fairchild was misled by the unnamed man about the identity of Mr. Easton, as he wanted to save Mr. Easton from an embarrassing situation by revealing that he, that is Mr. Easton, was a convict and was being taken by him to the prison. So the marshal did not want Mr. Easton to get all embarrassed in front of Mrs. Fairchild by knowing his true identity. Another passenger in the coach who has discovered that a marshal cannot handcuff his own right hand to that of a convict, as was the case with Mr. Easton and the marshal, because Mr. Easton had handcuffed his right hand to the marshal, and and Mr. Easton was called the marshal. So that other passenger reveals the twist in the end that marshals never handcuff their right hand to the convict. So here it is proved that Mr. Easton is not the marshal, but the glum-faced man is. So the okay, Mr. Easton, who was handsome, bold, he was actually the convict, and the rough, sad-looking man was the marshal. It is the heart's part of the title that explains the theme. The marshal was compassionate, so he told a lie to Miss Fairchild. He did this to save Mr. Easton from the humiliation of being identified as a convict in front of an old friend. He told Miss Fairchild that Mr. Easton was the marshal and he was the convict who was being taken to the prison by Mr. Easton. So he saved Mr. Easton from humiliation. The effect of the lie was immediate in response of Miss Fairchild. She showed relief that Mr. Easton was not the convict. Oh, said the girl, with a deep breath and returning color. She was shocked and horrified before the marshal told the lie to her. So the author has titled the story Hearts and Hands because by having the marshal lie about his hand being that of the convict, the marshal shows his heart for the convict. That is, the marshal shows compassion for Mr. Easton, and this highlights the theme of compassion. The word hearts is also indicative of the kind of friendship that existed between Miss Fairchild and Mr. Easton. When Mr. Fairchild saw when Miss Fairchild saw Mr. Easton, there appeared a lovely smile on her face, and her cheeks turned pink. But the moment she saw the handcuffs, her facial expression changed, and her heart, which seemed to be locked with the images of a happy past with Mr. Easton, gave way to horror. It appears that hands, meaning the handcuff, would decide the future course of her relationship with Mr. Easton.
There are two themes in the story that are very important. The first one being compassion. So, compassion, what is compassion? Compassion is defined as being sympathetic to others, that is, to think of others and to help them. In this story, compassion is shown through the ruffled, glum faced Marshal who did not let Easton reveal their true identities to Miss Fairchild to prevent him from any kind of embarrassment. When the Marshal realized that Miss Fairchild was a person who ate social images more than reality, he prevented Mr. Easton from speaking and said that Mr. Easton was the Marshal who was taking the glum faced man to the prison for counterfeiting. So that way, the glum-faced man showed compassion by hiding Mr. Easton's true identity and preventing him from getting into an embarrassing situation. The marshal, he was also a keen observer. He observed Mr. Easton's hesitation in recognizing Miss Fairchild, and also Miss Fairchild's bewildered horror on seeing Easton being handcuffed. The marshal thus understood the gravity of the situation and saved Mr. Easton from the humiliation of being recognized as convict in front of an old friend. He did not care for his own prestige, but tagged himself as the convict. Thus, the marshal's willingness to lie for Mr. Easton depicted that he was compassionate to people in need. Second theme that we have seen in the story is that appearances can be deceptive. This story presents us with three characters. One is the Martian, second is the convict, Mr. Easton, and third is the lady, Miss Fairchild. On a train to Denver, there was a chance meeting between a young lady and a convict who happened to be old friends. Our writer, O. Henry, he has depicted in this story that appearances can misrepresent reality. When the marshal and convict board the train, their physical appearances are described in such a way that it is later misled not only Miss Fairchild but also the readers. So, O. Henry has given the description of Mr. Easton Marshall in such a way that it seems to us that Mr. Easton is the marshal here, and anyone would think that the man who is glum faced and has a rough looking body, he must be the convict. But in reality, it is not so. The opposite is true. Mr. Easton is described as one of handsome presence with bold, frank countenance and manners, while the other is ruffled, heavily built, and roughly dressed and glum faced. So, when the real marshal tells Miss Fairchild that he is the convict who is being taken to prison by Mr. Easton, who is the marshal, it appears to be true, and Miss Fairchild does not notice that it is Easton's right hand that is handcuffed. She believes that her old friend is indeed a marshal. Appearances deceive her. O. Henry suggests that people often jump to conclusions that aren't true and ignore seemingly obvious details.